Well, welcome to the 700 Club. We've got Alan Dershowitz today talking about the special counsel and obstruction of justice and what all these things mean. But President Trump has called the investigation into so-called collusion with the Russians a witch hunt. But others are calling it a danger to the civil liberties of Americans because of political differences can be turned into criminal offenses. Then anyone can be a target.
At the same time, the government does believe that Russia did try to interfere with the election, even if the Trump campaign itself wasn't involved. Heather Sells brings us the story.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson made it clear that the U.S. believes Russia's actions have damaged the relationship between the two countries. Tillerson spoke with the Russian foreign minister in the Philippines this week at a meeting of Southeast Asian nations.
Trying to help them understand just how serious this incident had been and how seriously it had damaged the relationship between the U.S., the American people, and the Russian people, that this had created serious mistrust.
U.S. intelligence agencies believe Russia interfered in last year's election, but Moscow has vehemently denied any attempts at meddling. The problem now, retaliatory sanctions overwhelmingly passed by Congress last month have sparked a tit-for-tat. The president signed the bill despite his objections to it. And the Russia issue carries over to special counsel Robert Mueller's probe into that meddling. Some are concerned that he's gone beyond the scope of his original mandate and could be going on a so-called fishing expedition that would lead to looking into other activities or crimes. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein says Mueller is not going too far.
The special counsel is subject to the rules and regulations of the Department of Justice, and we don't engage in fishing expeditions.
Rosenstein says if Mueller finds evidence of other wrongdoing, he will have to ask for permission to expand his investigation. There are also questions about Mueller's impartiality because he has Hillary Clinton donors on his team. And there's concern about Mueller impaneling a grand jury. Does that mean that the probe has now turned into a criminal investigation? Rosenstein says no.
Many of our investigations, Chris, involve the use of the grand jury. It's an appropriate way to gather documents. Sometimes you bring witnesses in to make sure that you get their full testimony. It's just a tool that we use like any other tool in the course of our investigations.
Like it or not, the Russia probe and the many questions surrounding it appear to be far from over, and we may be dealing with this investigation for some time to come. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, with us now is a brilliant constitutional attorney. He is the Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law Emeritus at Harvard Law School. Professor, you have a new book out called Trumped Up, Criminalizing Politics is Dangerous. Well, why is that?
It's extremely dangerous to argue that every time a political figure you disagree with does something that you disagree with, that it's a crime. They've added something new to their arsenal. Now, if they disagree with you, they call you a racist. So they use the term crime, they use the term racist as weapons to try to silence their opponents. I was called a racist by Congresswoman Maxine Waters and others, because I made the observation that no criminal lawyer would disagree with, that the prosecutor has obtained a tactical advantage by moving the case from Virginia, which is a swing state, to the District of Columbia, which is 95% Democratic. Nobody would disagree with that point, but suddenly I'm a racist. Suddenly Donald Trump is a criminal because you disagree with his political points of view. This is very dangerous. It distorts terms like criminal and racist and makes them less powerful because it's crying wolf. If you call everybody a racist, no one is a racist. If you call everybody a criminal, no one is a criminal. And it's a very serious infringement on civil liberties to be arguing politics by throwing around terms like crime and racism.
You made a very cogent statement a year or so ago that the President of the United States cannot obstruct justice if he talks to his Attorney General or the FBI head to discuss a case. Would you elaborate on that, please?
Well, my precedent for that is no one other than Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson insisted that his Attorney General prosecute Aaron Burr. Every president in modern history has had contact with the Justice Department. The president is, after all, head of the unitary executive. The Justice Department works for the president. It's part of the executive branch. And the president can make the decision who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. It's not the right way to handle things. I would not urge the president to do that, but there's nothing illegal about a president instructing the Justice Department who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. There's long historical precedent. That's another example of people taking things they disagree with and suddenly saying, oh, that's an obstruction of justice. That's a crime. It's just historical nonsense.
It goes before Congress. Testimony says, I think there was obstruction of justice, and therefore we ought to call for a special prosecutor. The next thing you know, his close friend Mueller is named special prosecutor. But you say that there was no crime, there was no obstruction of justice in that discussion between him and the president. Is that right?
I think that's absolutely correct. But what Comey did was much worse. He didn't just go in front of Congress or go in front of the media. He leaked the material and laundered it through a law professor friend. And when the former head of the FBI is now doing the leaking instead of stopping the leaking, something wrong is happening in this country. He set a terrible, terrible precedent and should never have been involved in leaking material and laundering it through a law professor. That's just not the way the FBI should operate.
Rosenstein said, well, we really need to limit what Mueller's going to do, but how is that going to be done? He's got like a fishing license, and you also mentioned the fact that he's moved the grand jury from Virginia to Washington, which is primarily Democratic, and he's loaded up his staff with pro-Hillary Clinton supporters. Isn't that a bit of a conflict?
Well, reasonably we could disagree about whether or not people on his staff can be fair, whether the District of Columbia can afford a fair trial. All I said was that he got a tactical advantage by moving it from Virginia, which is a swing state, to the District of Columbia, which is overwhelmingly Democratic. I don't think there's a criminal defense lawyer in the world who would disagree with that statement, and yet it resulted in me being called a racist. And on CNBC last night, I was asked by the commentator, am I being paid by Donald Trump? And I'm called kind of a Trump lackey. I supported Hillary Clinton. I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm not doing this for Donald Trump. I'm doing this for all Americans as a civil libertarian. If Hillary Clinton had gotten elected and people were screaming, lock her up, and trying to create crimes to charge her with, I would be saying the same thing. And the people who today hate me would love me, and the people who today love me would hate me. That's what it means to be a civil libertarian. Sometimes what you say helps one side, sometimes it helps the other. That's not the reason I'm doing it. I'm doing it to help the civil liberties of all Americans who suffer when we turn political differences into crime. And that's the thesis of my book, Trumped Up, why the criminalization of politics endangers American democracy.
I want to ask you another question about the limits. Under the rules of the Justice Department, a special prosecutor is supposed to investigate specific crimes. There has to be a crime. And what is the crime? And is he restricted to investigations of that matter? Or can he just go on a fishing expedition and help himself to wherever he can find anything?
Well, we know what happened with Bill Clinton. They started out investigating financial corruption in Whitewater, found nothing, and ended up investigating him for Monica Lewinsky for a sex act. There are very, very few restrictions on what an independent counsel, a special prosecutor can do. They follow what they see. And, you know, I always analogize it to the great book by Herman Melville, Moby Dick. Captain Ahab had an obsession. He had to get the white whale, even if it cost him his life and the life of his crew. And I think when you have a special counsel, they have to find somebody. If they don't, they will have wasted the taxpayers' money. And that's what's wrong with bringing somebody on board and saying, we want you to find crimes. It reminds me of what Lavrenti Beria, the head of the KGB, said to Joseph Stalin. He said, show me the man, and I'll find you the crime. You can find criminal activities against almost anybody who's involved in complicated business, complicated politics. if you look hard enough and if your goal is to find criminal activity, that's not the way democracy should operate. By the way, we're not the only country that's suffering from that. In Israel today, Prime Minister Netanyahu is being hounded by trivial charges of criminal conduct, that maybe he took some cigars or champagne or his wife took some trays of food, and they're trying to get him out of office, not politically, not through the legal means, but through some efforts to try to criminalize political differences. So this is a spreading phenomenon that endangers democracy all over the world.
You very cogently suggested a little while ago that there should be a presidential commission. If they want to talk about Russia, let a commission do it. Can we transition, do you think, from this special prosecutor or special counsel to a presidential commission and shut Mueller down, or is that possible in today's world?
I think we made a mistake. We should never have had a special counsel because I didn't see any evidence of crime. We should have had an independent commission, bipartisan, nonpartisan, of the kind that was appointed after 9/11, to look into the impact of Russia on elections. That's not a Democrat-Republican issue. That's an American issue. If the Russians are trying to impact our election, doesn't matter whether they're doing it to help one side or another, they shouldn't be doing it. And if we had an independent commission, we'd already know what was going on because it would be done in the open. Instead, a grand jury is always done in secret. So we're not going to find out what actually went on with Russia unless and until the grand jury decides to indict. And if it decides not to indict, we'll have learned nothing. And if it decides to indict, there may be guilty pleas, so we'll never know what happened. It was the wrong vehicle, the wrong mechanism for trying to get the kind of information that all Americans are entitled to. Namely, did Russia try to influence the outcome, not only this election, but previous elections, and will they try to influence the outcome of future elections?
Can we shift at this point in the narrative from the special counsel to a commission, as you suggest? Can it be done?
It'll be very difficult to do that, but I think appointing a special commission would still be a good idea. And it would take a lot of the steam away from the special counsel because he operates in secret. He operates behind closed doors without the defendants having their lawyer present. Grand juries hear only one side of the evidence, only one side. That's why it was said by the chief judge of New York, a prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. It's the easiest thing in the world because all they hear is one side. Whereas a commission would hear all sides of the issue, would even invite the Russians to come and testify, would invite Democrats, Republicans. We would hear everything, but now we're not going to hear anything because it's behind closed doors.
Professor, brilliant analysis. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Alan Dershowitz, distinguished professor, Frankfurter Chair, Harvard Business School, and former, I might add, Yale Law School grad a couple of years after me.
Let me ask you this, because you have said this, and the professor has now said this. There should never have been a special counsel appointed. Who could have and should have stopped that?
Well, you see, the problem was the Attorney General had recused himself, so he let this Rosenzweig take over, and he never, I mean, I tell you what, I've run many businesses. CEO, if I had a vice president of my company who would appoint a lifetime tenure of somebody who was an avowed enemy, ready to destroy me, and it put him in without my knowledge, I mean, what would you do in any business situation? You'd fire that guy on the spot. But Trump is stuck because this Rosenzweig made that decision. His attorney general has recused himself, so he's out there all by himself, didn't confer with the president. It was an outrage how this was done, absolute outrage. And whether you can roll it back in now, but now there are some Republican senators saying, well, we want to pass a bill that forces the president to keep this guy, the Mueller, whether he likes it or not. This is an outrage what they're doing. It's an outrage, and it will hurt the country. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your country. This is my country. What we want to do is get jobs. What we want to do is have a tax cut. What we want to do is have a balanced budget. What we want to do is move forward boldly into the future. We don't care so much about whether some Russian talked to some political campaign 5 years ago. It doesn't matter. But the Democrats made a big deal of it, and they were willing to destroy this society. And you heard the professor talk about the man Ahab, who was willing to kill himself, his crew, and his ship in order to get one big white whale. We've got to stop chasing the whale and get this country back on its feet. We've got major problems. We've got North Korea. We've got Iran. We've got the breakup of the European Union. You've got all this stuff going on that imperils us. And we have to stop this nonsense. But instead of that, we've given a fishing expedition and an unlimited budget, apparently, to a zealot who's going to do everything he can to nail somebody for a, quote, crime that we're not sure it will ever happen. Whew.
A result of the swamp.
Well, hey, that swamp is crazy. The swamp creatures are winning. All right.